Hey there. In this video, I'm going to talk about correcting for an exposure. Some of you may have experienced shooting an image and everything was just really dark or even just black, or the opposite, everything was super bright or just all washed out. Those are bad exposures. How do we go about correcting for those exposures, or where did you go wrong? Okay, so let's take a look at that. So correcting for exposure is uh, finding a way to set your camera so it doesn't get those types of images where it is super black or just really dark or washed out an image. So a proper exposure is determined by your meter to create a photograph with acceptable brightness. Okay. So what is an underexposed photograph? An underexposed photograph can look something like this, right? How do we know this is underexposed? Well, maybe you've never seen this building, don't know where this is, but you can kind of gauge. You've seen buildings before, and you've seen what objects look like during the daytime. You can tell this is during the day. We have a blue sky. We have some shadows here. It looks like as if maybe you could be wearing sunglasses looking at this. Well, sunglasses make things darker on purpose so it's easier on your eyes, but they are really underexposing your scene, so it's not so bright for you. Well, this is what it looks like. It's as if you're looking through a tinted glass. It's darker than it should be. Right? It's an underexposed image. It's too dark. But what does that mean in terms of your image and in terms of light? Possibly the meter reading before this shot was taken was on the negative side. That's going to cause for an underexposed image. Like, let's say it looked like this, right? The meter reading was at the minus side, a -1 stop underexposed, right? This is to read this particular meter reading. This is a 1/125th of a second. That's the shutter at f22, ISO 200. Your meters may have similar information, but not necessarily in this order. In fact, your underexposed side and the overexposed side may be flipped around depending on your camera, but your meter will give you all of this information. Okay, so this is at 1/125th of a second, f22 at ISO 200, and the meter said it was -1 underexposed, and we got this shot. How do we correct for this? What can we do? Assuming, let's just keep ISO 200 the same, what can we do to correct for this image? If an image is too dark, we need to bring more light in to the sensor to brighten the image. Based upon the previous video on the idea of a stop, the last slide gave you some ideas of how you would brighten and darken images. In this case, we need to brighten it up. How do we allow more light in here? You have at least a couple options, assuming you keep the ISO the same. So, not enough light hitting the sensor, that's why it's too dark. What are our options? One option would be to open up your aperture or open up the lens, right? Just like opening the door much wider allows more light to come into the room, right? How do you open up your lens? What f-stop number would you go with? If the f-stop number was f22, what number would allow you to literally open up your lens, right? You would select a smaller number from f22 to f16. That would actually open up the lens, allowing more light in. Okay. That's not the only option. Remember, you can affect images' brightness by changing the shutter speed as well. If you were to slow the shutter down, it would actually let light in that way, right? It's opening and closing slower. If you made it slower, you would have more light come in to hit the sensor. So that could be an option as well. And of course, the third option would be increasing your ISO, which would make it much more sensitive to light. Any one of these would make it brighter. Okay, but let's assume we keep the ISO the same, ISO 200. Then you'd pick either one of these to make the image brighter. Okay, so you select one of these to make your meter go to the 0. Let's see what we did here. So it looks like the f-stop was changed from f22 to f16. That opened up the lens and allowing the meter to go to the 0. The shutter didn't change. We didn't change the ISO. And therefore, we got an image that looks like now you're no longer wearing those sunglasses, or you're not looking at this scene through a tinted glass. It looks like a properly exposed scene, the proper brightness. Okay, that's correcting for an underexposed photograph. An image that was too dark, you had to brighten it up. Let's go the other direction. An overexposed photograph. That's the counter opposite. That would be an image that is too bright. The meter reading would be on the plus side. Let's say it's at f11, same shutter speed, 1/125th of a second, ISO 200, and the meter read 1 on the plus side. You would get an image with too much light hitting the sensor. You get an image that looks like this. Some of you may have gone that. That's overexposed. Too much light hitting your sensor. We need to darken this. Again, refer to the previous video on the idea of a stop. How do we darken that image? There's several options. You basically need to decrease the amount of light hitting the sensor. You could close down your aperture, literally closing down your lens, which would mean a larger f-stop number. It would prevent light from coming in, right? That's one way. Other way would be to make the shutter speed faster. If you open and close the shutter speed faster, you're allowing less light in via time. And of course, the last way would be to decrease the sensitivity of the ISO. A lower ISO number makes your image less sensitive, or makes your sensor less sensitive to light. Let's assume we keep the ISO the same. We'll pick one or the other. And we ended up picking the f-stop once again in this one. We went from f11 to f16. f11 was twice the amount of light compared to f16. We closed it down from f11 to f16, and the meter went to the center, and then we have a properly exposed image. So think about which direction you need to go in terms of your shutter or your aperture or even your ISO if you are dealing with a bad exposure, whether it's too dark, underexposed, or a too bright, overexposed image. Think about what you need to do to correct for that. Make your corrections, look at the meter, and then take the picture. Okay?